Welcome back, everyone. If you are joining us today, I know exactly who you are.
You are the learner.
Exactly. You are that person who just loves to absorb massive and complex worlds. You crave the rich lore, and you live for layered character dynamics.
And you want to truly understand the mechanics of a universe without getting bogged down by the dreaded information overload.
Right. You want the substance, the actual meat of the story, and those deep thematic connections.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what we are going to deliver today.
We are embarking on a really massive mission for this deep dive. We are taking an extensive and comprehensive look at the world built in Storm of Secrets and Sorrow.
Which is book 2 of the Legacy series by Melissa K. Roehrich.
Right. And we have a really dense stack of source material in front of us today. We are looking at direct excerpts, author notes, incredibly detailed reference guides, and even a hilariously sarcastic recap from a character named Cyrus.
I love Cyrus.
Ah.
But yeah, our goal today is to untangle this immense, intricate web, because we are talking about a pantheon of gods, fractured kingdoms, forbidden bloodlines, and this multiversal threat that literally shatters the foundational lore of this dark fantasy realm.
It's a lot to get through.
Okay, let's unpack this, because there is a tremendous amount of ground to cover. But before we dive into the deep end of the lore and the character trauma, we absolutely have to pause and echo a very important note from the author herself.
Yeah, this is crucial.
Right at the beginning of the source material, she states very clearly that this world Devram is a dark little realm of depravity and wickedness. So this deep dive is going to cover some heavy themes.
Very heavy.
We are dealing with emotionally gray, or sometimes entirely pitch black characters. We're talking severe psychological trauma and systemic physical abuse.
And as the author notes, your mental health matters. Please do not go into this blind if those themes are not for you.
It's just a vital piece of context for everything we're about to discuss.
It really is. The characters in this series are pushed to their absolute psychological limits and sometimes way beyond them. To survive in a realm full of villains, these characters are forced to make horrific sacrifices.
It's a story defined by emotional whiplash, honestly.
Oh, absolutely. And keeping that broader context in mind as we go through this, we will connect all of this intense, visceral character drama directly back to the massive, realm-shattering lore that makes Devram so compelling.
I am ready. I've got my notes, and I am prepared for the chaos. So let's start by looking at the architecture of Devram itself.
The foundation.
Right, because before we can understand why our main character, Tessalyn, or Tessa, is completely upending this world, we really have to understand how rigid and structured this world is supposed to be in the first place.
It is incredibly rigid.
And the sources say it all starts with the pantheon. But let's pause right there for a second. When we say gods in the context of Devram, are we talking about distant, abstract deities up in the sky, or are we talking about a physical presence that shapes the everyday lives of the people?
It is definitely much closer to the latter. The hierarchy of gods is the absolute bedrock of Devram's society, and their influence is extremely tangible.
Like boots on the ground, tangible.
Exactly. The source material provides a brilliant reference guide that breaks this down. At the very top, you have the firsts. These are the original primordial deities.
And there are 6 of them, right?
Yes, 6. And they represent the fundamental forces of the world. You have Achaz, who is the god of light and beginnings, Arius, the god of death and endings, Seraphina, the goddess of dreams and stars,
Okay.
Anala, the goddess of Sunday and fire, Philin, the goddess of wisdom and cleverness, and finally, Celeste, the goddess of moon and sky.
Okay, so if those 6 are the architects, the originators of the world, what about the rest of the pantheon? Because the reference guide lists quite a few more names under a totally different category.
Right, those are the lessers. And the term lesser isn't just a polite ranking or a minor demotion. It implies a completely distinct origin. The lessers were literally created by the firsts.
Oh, wow. So they're creations, not originators.
Yeah, exactly. This includes deities like Zinta, the goddess of magic and sorcery, who is going to become incredibly important later on. There's also Sarana Sargon, the god of war, Pax, Silas Ray, Nith, Anahita, Raselda, Sepharina, and Grisil.
That is quite a roster.
It is. But this two-tiered divine hierarchy isn't just a religious belief system. It physically manifests into the geopolitical structure of the realm. Devram is divided into 6 distinct kingdoms, each bearing the name and the elemental affinity of one of the firsts.
Okay, so if the world is physically divided by these 6 elemental gods, How does that actually impact the people living there? Like, if you live in the Animal Kingdom, the Sun and Fire Kingdom, does that mean your entire society revolves around that specific element?
That is precisely how it works. Each kingdom has a very specific societal responsibility that mirrors their god. It's a highly compartmentalized civilization.
Almost industrialized in a magical sense.
Totally. The Animal Kingdom, tied to the Sun and Fire, is responsible for food and agriculture. They feed the realm. The Fellain Kingdom, tied to wisdom and cleverness, they produce the scholars, the intellectuals, and the healers.
That makes perfect sense.
Then you have the Celeste Kingdom, under the moon and sky. They are tasked with running a very specific societal mechanism called the selection process, which we really need to get into shortly.
We definitely will. And Seraphina.
The Seraphina Kingdom provides the artists, the creators, and the architects.
And then you have the Orcas Kingdom, light and beginnings. According to the text, they act as the overarching rulers of the realm.
The top of the political food chain.
Right. They're the ones responsible for upholding Devram's laws and accords. They are essentially the police and the Supreme Court rolled into one.
Which leaves the final kingdom, the Arius Kingdom, the kingdom tied to death endings and shadows. While the other kingdoms are handling food and art and law, the Arius Kingdom manages the underground.
The underground. That sounds incredibly ominous.
It is.
So we have this beautifully or perhaps terrifyingly compartmentalized world. But the gears of this world don't just turn on their own. This brings us to the overarching premise of the series.
The system that keeps all these kingdoms running.
Exactly. And the source of so much trauma for our characters, the selection. I want to make sure we define the terms here clearly for you listening. The sources frequently use the words Fae, legacy, and source. What exactly do these terms mean in the context of Devram?
Right, we need to establish that.
Like when we say Fae, are we talking about tiny winged fairies from traditional folklore?
Not at all. In Devram, Fae refers to a specific class of beings who possess innate elemental magic. They look essentially human, but they carry this raw magical potential.
But they aren't the ones in charge.
No, not even close. They are treated as a subjugated class. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the legacy. These are the ruling class, the direct descendants of the gods themselves. They carry the divine bloodlines of the firsts and the lessers.
And the power dynamic between the legacy and the Fae is where the concept of a source comes in.
Yes. Because the legacy possess these incredible God-given abilities, but utilizing that magic is incredibly draining. It heavily taxes their bodies and minds.
It's not unlimited power.
Right. To wield their power effectively, they need a battery. They need a source. And that is exactly what the Fae are used for.
Wow.
The sources tell us that every 5 years there is a selection year run by the Celeste Kingdom. The heirs from all 6 kingdoms select Fae to serve as their source of power.
So it's a parasitic, or at its absolute best, a deeply skewed symbiotic relationship where the legacy draw their magical stamina from the Fae.
Exactly. They bond with them through something called a source mark.
Let's ask you, the listener, to think about that for a second. Imagine if your entire worth to society, your entire legal standing, was dictated by your battery capacity for someone else.
That's horrifying.
Imagine being raised with the knowledge that your ultimate destiny is to just be tethered to a member of the ruling class, having your own energy drained to fuel their ambitions. It's a horrific concept.
It is a deeply entrenched and rigid system. It is literally how the balance of power has been maintained for centuries.
But a rigid system, one that relies on the absolute subjugation of an entire class of people, is always the most vulnerable to a catastrophic anomaly.
A system that cannot bend will eventually shatter.
Yes, and that anomaly, the hammer that is going to shatter Devram, is Tessalyn Ausra. Tessa. So if you have a society wound this tightly, where power is entirely dependent on this rigid selection process, historically, it only takes one variable to break the entire machine.
And boy, does she break it.
To catch everyone up on the sheer chaos that Tessa caused in Book 1, our sources include this brilliant quick recap narrated by a character named Cyrus.
I love the Cyrus recap.
It's so good, and I have to say the contrast between the intense dark lore we just discussed and Cyrus's tone is jarring in the best possible way.
He's clearly an outsider.
Right, he's recounting these world-altering events to his friends while casually shuffling a deck of cards.
Cyrus's casual narration actually serves a very specific narrative purpose. It provides a stark contrast to the sheer unadulterated trauma that Tessa endures.
Yeah, he notes that for the first time in centuries, heirs from all 6 kingdoms selected Fae in the realm. That alone is a massive geopolitical event.
Massive. But the biggest shock was Tessa. She was a Fae who hadn't even emerged into her elemental magic yet. She was considered a dud by the system standard.
A total blank slate.
Yet she was unexpectedly selected by Theon St. Orcas, the notoriously ruthless heir of the Arius kingdom.
Cyrus actually calls Theon a walking red flag,
Yeah.
which is hilarious but also incredibly accurate based on what happens next.
Oh, absolutely accurate.
Because after receiving the first source mark connecting her to Theon, Tessa does what any sane person would do in that situation. She tries to run.
Cyrus actually says, honestly, who can blame her at this point?
Exactly. And the punishment for running is severe.
Very severe. She's hunted down in the woods by Theon and his guardian Luca Moors. She's brought back to Arius' house and subjected to stricter punishments. She is physically shoved under tables and denied food.
Just completely dehumanized.
Yes, and she undergoes a deeply traumatic assessment process designed to force her dormant magic to the surface. And during this assessment, it is revealed that she will be the most powerful fae in Devram, regardless of what her element turns out to be.
And as soon as the rest of the world finds out that the Arius kingdom has their hands on the most powerful source in history, the political games begin.
Everyone wants her.
She survives assassination attempts, and eventually she is essentially kidnapped by the Aeshaz lord, a man named Walter St. Orcas, right out from under the Arius kingdom's nose.
And Walter is Theon's father.
Right, which adds this incredibly toxic family dynamic to the geopolitical crisis.
We really need to look at Walter St. Orcas and the historical context behind his actions. Why is the Aeshaz lord, the supposed upholder of law and light, acting like a brutal Machiavellian villain?
It seems completely contradictory.
Why does he feel entitled to just snatch his own son's source? Well, the sources reveal a deep, festering historical resentment that explains the current geopolitical tension.
Right, because earlier we established that Aeshaz is the kingdom of light and beginnings, and they rule the realm. Arius is the kingdom of death and endings, and they manage the underground.
Yes.
But it wasn't always this peaceful, compartmentalized arrangement, was it?
Far from it. The Ares kingdom was historically sequestered. They were essentially banished to their mountains and the desolate shade plains because they committed the ultimate heresy in Devram.
Which was?
They refused to acknowledge the Revelation Decree. Specifically, they rejected the part of the decree that dictated life needing to rule.
Ah. So because Orcas represents light and life, the decree stated they had the divine right to rule over the kingdom that represented death and endings.
Exactly.
That's a massive philosophical and political slight against the Arius kingdom.
It was an ideological schism that almost tore the realm apart centuries ago. The Ares kingdom just ignored the decree. In secret, they built a massive army and planned to start a war with the other kingdoms to assert their equality or perhaps their dominance.
And I'm guessing that didn't go well for them.
Not at all. When this plot was discovered, the retribution from the rest of the realm led by Orcas was absolute. They cut the Ares kingdom off completely.
Total embargo.
They refused all trade, taxed them to the point of poverty, and sentenced their armies to rot in the underground. It took centuries of grueling isolation for the Arius kingdom to become prosperous again.
So when we look at Walter St. Orcas, a man who sits on the throne of the Aeshaz kingdom, but shares blood with the Arius line, his machinations, his cruelty, his desperate desire to control Tessa's unprecedented power.
It's not just standard villain greed.
Right. It's fueled by centuries of historical ostracization. He is playing a very long game of retribution against the very realm he governs.
Exactly. He views Tessa not as a person, but as the ultimate weapon in a centuries-old Cold War. He wants to leverage her power to permanently reshape the hierarchy of Devram.
Which places Tessa squarely in the center of a terrifyingly large game board. But here is the thing about Tessalyn Ausra. She is not a pawn.
Definitely not.
She's not the type of person to sit quietly while ancient lords move her around. She is defiant, impulsive, and utterly resistant to being controlled.
And to truly understand why, to understand the psychology of her rebellion, we have to look at her past. The sources give us a haunting flashback sequence to 2.5 years ago.
This is before the selection.
Right at a place called the Celeste Estate.
This flashback is so vital. It provides the psychological blueprint for Tessa's character. It explains the why behind her hostility in the present day.
So what exactly is the Celeste Estate?
The Celeste Estate is where Fae are essentially held and trained, or rather broken, before the selection year. It is overseen by a legacy named Mother Cordelia, and the conditions described are nothing short of horrific.
It's essentially a prison camp.
Yes. The scene opens with Tessa sitting on a bench at the edge of the estate wards. She's barefoot, her stomach is painfully grumbling with hunger, and she's waiting for her best friend, a wind fae named Dex.
Dex is the one who sneaks her food, right?
Yeah, because the text explicitly states that Mother Cordelia punishes Tessa by locking her in dark, windowless cellars and small cupboards withholding food for days on end.
That is monstrous.
It is a visceral, claustrophobic form of cruelty designed to break a child's spirit. Think about the psychological impact of that. Think about a time you, the listener, have been forced to comply with a rule that fundamentally made no sense to you.
The frustration is maddening.
And multiply that frustration by 1,000, add physical starvation, sensory deprivation, and total isolation. That is Tessa's baseline reality.
And look at how Tessa's mind adapts to survive that reality. Her default setting becomes extreme defense. She trusts absolutely no one.
Not even the other kids.
When Dex eventually shows up and brings 2 new Fae Corbin and Lange with him, Tessa's reaction is instant hostility. She assumes Corbin is a spy there to report them to the guards for breaking the rules.
She just expects betrayal at every turn.
Because the system has taught her that vulnerability equals punishment.
But Dex managed to break through those impenetrable walls. How did he do it? It wasn't through grand speeches or magical displays. It was through the simplest, most profound act of consistency.
Just showing up.
We learn that when Tessa would disappear into those cellars for days, Dex would leave her extra food. And crucially, he expected nothing in return.
That is the turning point in her psychological development. She expected a transactional cost. In the Celeste estate, every interaction has a cost.
Everything is a trade.
But Dex offered survival with no strings attached. No demand for affection, no request for favors, no hidden agenda, just a basic, undeniable acknowledgement of her humanity.
The tragedy of that is just profound. She hadn't known people actually did things for one another without expecting to extract a toll. That is the depth of the trust issues we are dealing with here.
It's heartbreaking.
And yet, despite the cellar, she still possesses this incredible, stubborn spark of rebellion. There is a scene where she sneaks off the estate grounds, bypassing the wards with Dex, Lange, Aurelia, and Corbin.
They risk severe punishment, possibly death, to go to a nearby town called Arabelle.
And why do they risk it all? To get donuts.
It really highlights how trauma warps the perception of value. To a normal person, a donut is a trivial morning snack.
Right, you grab them with coffee.
But to Tessa and these subjugated Fae, a simple chocolate-frosted donut represents a massive, monumental victory. It is a stolen moment of autonomy. It is proof that they can still choose something for themselves, even if it's just sugar and fried dough.
There is this beautifully tragic exchange during that trip. Lange looks at Tessa, seeing her briefly relaxed, and says he wants to make her happy. And Tessa mutters back, "As happy as we can be anyway."
Let's analyze that phrase. As happy as we can be. It is a philosophy born entirely of survival. She is acknowledging that pure, unburdened happiness is an impossible concept for them.
Because they are Fae.
They are destined to be cattle for the legacy. She has long since stopped dreaming of a fairy tale ending. She only understands and only hopes for temporary reprieves from suffering. That is the lens through which she views the entire world.
And while she's internally managing this profound psychological trauma, her physical body is undergoing a terrifying transformation. Her magic, which everyone assumed was dormant or non-existent, is actually stirring beneath the surface.
And the way the authorities try to force it out is absolutely barbaric.
The assessments.
The sources describe these traumatic assessments where they strap her to a chair, literally restraining her, and force horrific visions into her mind to trigger a magical stress response.
The visions are designed to induce maximum panic. In one specific assessment described in the text, she is plunged into a vision where she is trapped underground.
And she's claustrophobic.
Right. She feels someone with wings pulling her along in the dark. She feels fangs pierce her throat. She is drowning, unable to breathe. It is psychological torture engineered to push her mind to the breaking point so her magic will lash out in self-defense.
And when her power finally does unleash in the present day after she's been selected by Theon, it is nothing like the standard elemental magic of Deveram.
No, it's not just a spark.
She doesn't just conjure a flame or manipulate a breeze. She possesses weather and storm magic. According to the lore we just discussed, no known god or goddess, not the first, not the lessers, possesses that specific power.
And the imagery the author uses to describe it is stunning.
It's a complete disruption of the natural order. The text describes golden light crackling at her fingertips, howling winds ripping through the opulent indoor spaces of the Arius house, actual rain falling from the ceiling indoors.
It is a violent, uncontrollable, localized weather event.
Exactly.
It is the perfect external manifestation of her internal state, isn't it? After years of being locked in small, dark cupboards and forced to compress her emotions, her magic manifests as a literal storm.
A sprawling, chaotic, expansive force that refuses to be contained.
The text calls it untamed and free, wild and reckless, their destruction and her salvation.
But look at how the Arius kingdom, specifically Theon, responds to this unprecedented, beautiful power. Do they revere it? Do they try to understand it?
Absolutely not.
No, their immediate institutional response is to suppress it. They slap restrictive bands on her wrists.
These are physical and magical restraints designed to cap her power.
And they take a horrific physical toll, leaving the flesh on her wrists raw red and burning.
I want to ask you, the listener, to really put yourself in Tessa's shoes again. Imagine possessing this immense innate talent, a fundamental part of your very soul, your identity, that is finally, after years of suppression, trying to burst out of you.
And society says no.
And the society you live in, the people who legally claim to own you, are so terrified of what you are capable of that they physically force you to suppress it with burning metal restraints. How would that constant agonizing friction breed anything but pure, unadulterated rebellion?
It's the ultimate pressure cooker. They're trying to compress a Category 5 hurricane into a small glass jar. It is structurally and magically unsustainable.
And Theon, who is supposed to be this brilliant calculating heir, fundamentally struggles to understand this.
He approaches Tessa as a problem to be solved, a wild animal to be broken and retrained. He tries to control the uncontrollable.
There's a moment when the bands are temporarily removed and her power erupts. She looks at Theon, who is trying to calm her down with assurances of protection, and she tells him flat out, "Your promises mean nothing to me."
She sees right through his so-called protection.
To her, those restrictive bands are exactly the same as Mother Cordelia's dark cellars. It's just a different cage built by a different jailer designed to break her will.
So we have established this incredibly volatile baseline. We have a deeply traumatized, fiercely independent protagonist armed with unprecedented god-tier storm magic, trapped within a rigid, oppressive geopolitical system that views her as a weapon.
It is a powder keg.
It really is.
Okay, let's unpack this, because here's where it gets really interesting. Just when you think the story is going to be a straightforward rebellion against the Arius kingdom, the entire system gets broken from the outside.
Yes.
In one of the most satisfying and paradigm-shifting scenes in the source material, the supposedly impenetrable magical wards of the highly secure Arius townhouse are casually breached.
It is a phenomenal sequence. Theon, his guardian Luca, and his brother Axel are sequestered in their secure townhouse, deeply engrossed in a discussion about the ancient everlasting war, feeling relatively safe behind their ancient magic. And suddenly, without warning, two intruders just appear in the room, Scarlet and Soren. This is the moment the foundational lore of the series breaks wide open.
It's such a great tense scene. Scarlet is described as a silver-haired female radiating an aura of absolute power with literal white flames and shadow panthers prowling around her.
And Soren is her towering, physically imposing companion.
They bypass centuries-old Arius wards as if they were walking through a beaded curtain. Theon immediately goes into defense mode. He demands to know who they are, fully expecting them to cower and bow to his authority as the fearsome heir of the Arius kingdom.
And Scarlet's reaction tells you everything you need to know about the new scale of the story. Theon aggressively refers to Tessa as his source and commands Scarlet to address him as master.
Big mistake.
For a man used to absolute deference, Scarlet's response is a slap in the face. She literally scoffs in disgust. She bursts out laughing at the very idea of calling him master, and instead dismissively refers to him as a lordling.
Lordling. It completely deflates his localized authority. It's like a local mayor trying to pull rank on a 5-star general.
Scarlet is operating on a multiversal scale of power, and she finds Devram's little hierarchies, their selections and their titles, utterly pathetic.
Theon is furious, but he's also incredibly intelligent. He realizes the impossibility of their presence. He demands to know how they bypass the wards.
And Soren casually drops the bomb that they didn't just bypass the wards, they bypassed the realm. They came from another world entirely.
This introduces a concept that completely shatters the character's understanding of the universe world walkers.
Wait, let's pause and digest that. We just spent 20 minutes defining this incredibly rigid, closed-loop magic system of Devram. The 6 kingdoms, the firsts, the lessers.
And now we are learning that this entire system is actually just a tiny, isolated fraction of a much larger multiverse.
Exactly. Within Devram, world walkers were considered ancient mythology. Characters like Katya, who is the scholar of Theon's group, believed they were just stories, ancient beings capable of traveling through the fabric of reality, ferrying people across the stars from one realm to another.
But they are real.
Scarlet confirms not only that the myths are real, but that she is one of them. The realization that their realm is not closed, that their gods are not the only powers in the universe, is terrifying for someone like Theon, who relies on absolute control.
But the real bombshell, the revelation that drops the floor out from under the entire plot, is why Scarlet is there.
Yes.
Theon naturally assumes she is an assassin or a thief sent to steal Tessa, the ultimate power source. But Scarlet looks at Tessa, observes the magic swirling around her, and says, "My magic is not Arius magic. Arius magic is not just shadows and darkness. Cousin."
Cousin. That single word unravels Tessa's entire identity and fundamentally rewrites the history of the world.
Tessa has spent her whole life believing she was an unwanted disposable fae, abandoned by whoever her parents were.
And Scarlet methodically reveals her true lineage. Scarlet explains that her own mother is Selah, the goddess of shadows and night, who was a secret daughter of Arius and Seraphina. And Scarlet's father is a legacy of Anahita.
But Tessa's parentage is the true shock.
Tessa's father is Temral, the god of the wild and untamed.
Tessa is the direct daughter of a god, not a descendant, a daughter. Her grandmother is Seraphina, one of the firsts, the goddess of dreams and stars.
It's an incredible revelation.
It is. But Theon Ever, the historian, immediately catches the devastating cosmic implications of this family tree. Because according to the ancient lore, Seraphina was never supposed to be with Arius.
She was supposed to be matched with the Heshas.
The historical implications are massive. Let's pivot slightly and look at the origin of the everlasting war. According to the texts, the firsts created the realm of Devram with a very specific purpose to maintain universal balance.
As part of this grand design, Achaz light and Seraphina stars were biologically and magically matched. They were supposed to create specific offspring to secure victory in a primordial conflict known as the First War. It was a cosmic arrangement.
But love doesn't care about cosmic arrangements. Arius' death and Seraphina fell in love. They chose each other in defiance of the grand design.
They had secret children, Selah and Temral, and managed to keep them hidden from the other gods for centuries.
And when this forbidden romance and the existence of their secret children were eventually discovered, it didn't just cause a scandal, it tipped the cosmic balance.
It escalated the conflict and perpetuated the everlasting war across the realms. The very existence of Temral, and by extension Tessa, is a living, breathing symbol of divine defiance that fractured the gods.
So Tessa is literally the product of a cosmic scandal that broke the universe. But wait, as mind-blowing as that is, it only explains half the mystery. Being the daughter of the god of the wild explains her immense untamed storm power. But it doesn't explain her unique physical traits, specifically her violet gray eyes or the prophetic visions she suffers from.
For that piece of the puzzle, we have to look at her mother's side,
which requires some intense detective work.
Theon and his brother Axel spend hours in the massive Pantheon archives poring over ancient texts. They piece together the clues, the visions, the eye color, the specific manifestation of her magic, and realize Tessa must have witch blood.
Let's define witches in the context of Devram, because it's not the traditional pointy hat folklore.
Right. Devram has two sister goddesses of witchcraft and sorcery, Zinta and Taika. These goddesses represent different facets of magic.
How so?
Zinta is firmly loyal to the Axel kingdom, the kingdom of light. Taika is loyal to the Arius kingdom, the kingdom of shadows. The complication is that many of the Taika legacy were brutally slaughtered centuries ago, making their bloodline incredibly rare.
So let's look at the absolute genetic and magical impossibility of Tessa. She has the blood of Arius, which represents death and shadows.
She has the blood of Achaz through the lineage of Zinta, which represents light and beginnings.
And she has the blood of witches, which grants her prophecy and visions. She is a walking contradiction to Devram's strict, compartmentalized magical categories. She embodies both extreme light and extreme dark simultaneously.
Which perfectly explains why her power manifests as a storm. From a meteorological standpoint, what is a storm? It is the violent collision of high pressure and low pressure. It is hot air and cold air clashing.
I love that.
Tessa's magic is a violent atmospheric rebalancing of deeply opposed ancient bloodlines that were never meant to mix.
That is a brilliant analogy. The storm is the friction of her genetics, and Scarlet points this out immediately.
When she looks closely at the source mark on Tessa's heart, Scarlet notes with a sense of dread that Devram has tipped the scales.
Balance is the fundamental requirement of the universe. But the creation of Tessa, bringing together these deeply opposed forces into one vessel, is a disruption of the highest order.
And speaking of deeply opposed forces violently clashing, we cannot discuss the magic of this world without discussing the deeply entangled, messy, and psychologically intense relationships between Tessa Theon and Luca.
Oh, yes.
Because this is not your standard run-of-the-mill love triangle. It is a magical and psychological minefield.
It absolutely is. Let's start by analyzing Theon St. Orcas. If we are unpacking literary tropes, Theon is the ultimate morally gray heir. But is he really just a red flag? Based on the notes about his father, Walter, it sounds like Theon's cruelty might be a learned survival mechanism.
That's a very sharp observation. Theon is ruthless, possessive, and arrogant, but he is a product of his environment. His magic reflects his internal state. It is a chaotic, inky darkness that constantly tries to take control of his mind.
He has to fight it constantly.
Yeah. He has to exercise immense, exhausting control just to stay sane. And he is terrified of his father. He spends hours in the archives exhausting himself, trying to uncover Tessa's lineage, not just to use her, but to find a legal or magical loophole to protect her from Walter and the other lords who want to exploit her.
But the way Theon and Tessa interact is just pure friction. They're both incredibly traumatized people trying to assert dominance to feel safe.
And there's a fascinating magical component to their attraction.
Even though scientifically and magically light and dark should repel each other, Tessa's golden light and Theon's shadows are irresistibly drawn together.
There's this incredible tension-filled scene where Tessa is leaning over him, her golden magic literally winding around his neck, sliding through his hair, and his darkness rises up off his skin to tangle with it like two vipers.
And in that moment, she whispers this chilling line to him: secrets are currency. Secrets are leverage. Secrets are how you get what you want.
Look at what she's doing there. She is weaponizing the very lessons he and the brutal Arius kingdom taught her. She has internalized the harsh reality that in a world that completely strips her of bodily autonomy, information is the only armor she has left.
She uses secrets to maintain a sliver of power in a dynamic where she is legally considered property.
But Theon is terrified of that independence. He wants her to submit to his protection.
The tragedy is that to Tessa, his protection looks an awful lot like another cage. And into this highly volatile, toxic dynamic steps Luca Moores.
Luca is a phenomenal character study in contrast. He is Theon's guardian, magically and oath-bound to protect the heir, but the sources reveal a massive secret about his lineage as well. He is a Sargon legacy.
Sargon is the god of war, and being his legacy means Luca possesses a very rare, incredibly dangerous ability. He is a dragon shifter.
Which is a classic fantasy trope, but the way he is utilized in this story is so unique. Because despite being a literal weapon of war, a dragon, Luca's role in Tessa's life, is the complete opposite of Theon's.
Where Theon tries to suppress her storms with metal bands and authoritative commands, Luca is the grounding force.
There is a deeply emotional scene at a riverbank where Tessa completely loses control. Her trauma triggers her magic, whipping violent winds and icy rain around them. Theon would have yelled at her to rein it in. What does Luca do?
Luca simply holds her. He steps into the storm, pulls her against his chest, cradles her head, and lets her physically rage against him.
He doesn't try to silence her. He doesn't tell her to calm down.
He provides a physical, unbreakable anchor when her psychological trauma causes her magic to violently lash out. He offers a safe harbor that expects nothing in return, mirroring the kindness Dex showed her years ago.
But here is the massive complication that turns this dynamic into a tragedy: the accidental triad. Because of the strict laws of Devram, Theon had to give Tessa the first source mark to legally claim her and keep her out of the hands of the other kingdoms.
But her power, this latent god-tier storm magic of the wild, was simply too immense for one person to handle.
The magical load was crushing. It was literally tearing Theon's mind and body apart to try and tether her alone. The bond was killing them both.
Right. So Luca, bound by his fierce duty to protect Theon, and driven by his own growing deep connection to Tessa, had to make a split-second decision.
He stepped in and applied a second source mark to her to distribute the magical load and save their lives.
This created an unprecedented, deeply messy magical bond between the three of them. When Scarlet the World Walker sees this trifold bond, she is absolutely horrified. She states unequivocally that there should only ever be one source mark.
And the consequence of this botched forced bond is a psychological nightmare emotional bleed-through.
The barrier between their minds is compromised.
Tessa can suddenly feel what they are feeling and vice versa. When she wakes up after a 2-day magically induced sleep, she looks at Theon and physically feels his apprehension echoing in her own chest. Later, she feels Luca's protective rage pulsing through her veins.
And it goes both ways, right? When Theon is miles away sitting in a tense political meeting, he can suddenly feel Tessa's anger, her betrayal, and her deep sorrow washing over him. It's an invasion of privacy on the deepest conceivable level.
It raises a profoundly disturbing question for the characters, one that tortures all three of them. How much of their intense attraction, their fierce loyalty, and their desperate need to protect one another is genuine emotion, and how much of it is artificially enforced by this mutilated magical bond?
It completely strips away their emotional autonomy.
And for someone like Tessa, who has already had her physical autonomy violently stripped away by the Celeste estate, and the selection process losing her emotional autonomy is devastating.
She can't even trust her own feelings.
Yeah.
She doesn't know where she ends and her captors begin.
Exactly. The psychological pressure is immense, and just when you think the internal conflict can't possibly escalate further, the external threats against them ramp up to a terrifying degree.
The world is not just passively observing Tessa. Powerful factions are actively trying to eliminate her because they understand exactly what her existence represents.
This introduces a new faction from the sources, the Augury. This is a secret society comprised of scholars, legacy, and fae. And their sole fanatical purpose is to maintain the realm's balance.
And in their eyes, Tessa is the ultimate disruption. They believe she brings the end of Devram itself.
Secret societies obsessed with balance are a fascinating trope because their definition of balance usually means maintaining the status quo, which, as we've established, is built on systemic oppression.
The Augury isn't interested in justice. They're interested in preservation.
There is an incredibly tense cinematic confrontation in the dark aisles of the Pantheon archives. Theon and Axel are desperately looking for clues about Tessa's lineage, and these robed figures from the Augury corner them.
And they aren't wielding standard swords or magic. They're armed with crooked daggers, specifically designed and enchanted to bypass a legacy's magic and kill them by striking the heart.
The dialogue during this confrontation is chilling. The Augury issues a stark warning to Theon. They say, "The rivers will run red, the realm will split, and all will fall. None will be left standing when chaos comes to reign. It does not favor, only wants for more."
They do not view Tessa as a traumatized young woman. They view her as the literal embodiment of chaos, a cosmic mistake that must be surgically erased to preserve their world.
And this threat from the Augury isn't just an external physical danger, it bleeds directly into Tessa's subconscious.
The sources detail a harrowing, vivid, prophetic vision she suffers, and it is gut-wrenching. She is trapped, paralyzed, unable to move. It's pouring rain. Theon is standing over her, looking down at her.
Luca's there in the background, desperately holding her, begging Theon to find another way.
But Theon looks down at Tessa, deep sorrow flashing in his eyes, and he says, "I'm sorry I loved you too late, but I'm yours, every piece of me." And then he plunges a black dagger straight into her heart.
It is a devastating sequence to read, and we have to analyze this vision carefully because in a world with which, blood visions are rarely straightforward.
Is this a literal, unavoidable premonition of the future? We know Tessa has prophetic abilities. Will Theon actually kill her?
Or is it highly metaphorical? Could the dagger plunging into her heart represent the agonizing severing of the deeply flawed source bond?
Perhaps it represents a necessary sacrifice. To save her from being a permanent battery for the area's kingdom, and to save his own sanity, Theon must symbolically kill the bond and act so dramatic it feels like dying to them both.
There's a third, even darker interpretation. Is it a literal, necessary sacrifice to save the multiverse? If Tessa is truly the embodiment of chaos, as the Augury claims, Theon might be forced to make the ultimate horrific choice, kill the woman he loves to save the universe from unraveling.
It's an agonizing dilemma. But Theon isn't the only one suffering the consequences of Tessa's existence. We have to talk about Axel, Theon's younger brother. Because the brutal reality of Elder St. Orcas' cruelty comes crashing down on Axel in one of the most difficult scenes of the text.
Axel's arc is a brilliant, dark exploration of the spare heir trope. Historically, in monarchies, the spare is kept around purely as an insurance policy. They have all the pressure of royalty, but none of the purpose until tragedy strikes.
In Devram, being the spare to an immortal, all-powerful lord is a position of intense vulnerability.
Vulture, the Ashaz Lord, orchestrates a chaotic situation where Tessa is taken. Axel, who had been tasked with guarding her, is hauled before his own father for an interrogation. But it's not a conversation, it's physical, agonizing torture.
The text explicitly describes Axel kneeling on the floor, blood pooling around his knees, blood dripping down his chin. His shadow magic stutters and completely fails against his father's overpowering ancient magic.
Volter has another powerful legacy, pressing a knee violently into Axel's spine and forearm, demanding to know where Tessa is.
The brutality is staggering. Axel's experiencing the agonizing pain of having his power ripped from him and his magic wells forcibly emptied. Yet he refuses to break.
He spits blood onto the floor and defiantly tells his father, "I made sure I didn't know." He intentionally kept himself ignorant of Tessa's location to protect her and to protect his brother.
And Volter's response is bone-chilling. He looks at his bleeding, broken son and tells him that if they can't find Tessa, soon enough there will no longer be a need for a spare heir and you can finally fulfill your true purpose.
Let that sink in. Volter views his own children merely as tools, as expendable contingencies. If Axel cannot produce the prize, he is entirely disposable. He will be killed just to serve a political purpose.
It's a profound realization. It shows that Tessa, Theon, Luca, and Axel, despite being on wildly different rungs of the social ladder, are all victims of the exact same oppressive machine.
They're all just stationed at different gears, being ground down by the same systemic cruelty. But Tessa is the wrench thrown into those gears. Her existence threatens to break the whole machine apart.
Which brings us to the final cosmic stakes of the story. Because as the plot progresses, it becomes abundantly clear that this is no longer just a localized conflict about who gets to sit on the throne of Devram. The scale expands massively.
To understand the true scope of the threat, the narrative follows Tessa deep into the underground glass-paned cells of the Atchez Palace. She is inexplicably drawn to a mysterious prisoner held there.
She notes that the magic humming in the very bars of his cell feels identical to the untamed magic humming in her own veins.
And this ancient prisoner recognizes her instantly, though he refuses to give his own name. He looks at her and calls her a daughter of wild and fury.
And then he drops a massive philosophical bomb on her. He tells her, you believe your destiny is set, but you do not realize you stand at a crossroads, salvation or destruction.
This interaction is the crucible of Tessa's character arc. She has spent her entire life being told she is nothing. She was locked in cupboards, starved, restrained by burning magical bands, and repeatedly told that her only destiny is to be a disposable battery for a legacy.
But the truth, revealed by this prisoner, is that she holds the fate of the entire realm in her hands. She has agency.
The choice is hers. Will she save the world that abused and enslaved her, or will she be the instrument of its absolute destruction?
And the terrifying urgency of that choice is compounded by the arrival of two new characters, Razek and Eliza. The sources note they are from Scarlet's court, sent from another realm entirely.
And Razek delivers an absolutely terrifying assessment to a character named Tristan Blackheart, who is a mortal disguised elite operating in the shadows.
Razek does not mince words. He looks at the situation and states flatly that Tessa was never meant to exist. The intermingling of the ancient firsts, the witches, the wild gods, it has created a genetic and magical anomaly that the multiverse simply cannot sustain.
The pressure is too high. Razek warns that if the balance is not corrected, it is not just the realm of Devram that will fall. The disruption will ripple out. All realms will fracture. The stars will fall, and chaos will reign supreme.
So what does this all mean? We have a protagonist who is deeply, profoundly sympathetic. We've seen her starve. We've seen her tortured for her magic.
They've seen her desperately cling to the small, pathetic comfort of a shared donut just to feel human.
We as readers want her to burn her oppressors to the ground. We want her to unleash that storm. But the universe itself, the fundamental laws of reality, are saying that her very existence, her entirely justified fury, is a cancer that will consume everything innocent and guilty alike.
It is a brilliant, agonizing thematic struggle. Tessa is undeniably the victim of a rigid, unimaginably cruel system. Devram's laws, the revelation decree, the selection process, they're all stagnant, decaying structures, built on historical resentments and the brutal subjugation of the Fae.
But Tessa's wild, untamed magic is the literal antithesis of structure. She is the physical embodiment of a broken rule. So the core conflict of the series isn't a simple battle of good versus evil.
No, it's far more complex than that. It is a battle between order, no matter how oppressive, suffocating, and cruel that order may be, versus chaos, no matter how liberating, justified, and utterly destructive that chaos might be.
Tessa must ultimately choose if the cost of her personal freedom and the vengeance she is owed is worth the ashes of the entire multiverse.
Wow. Just wow, what an intense, densely layered, incredibly rich world Melissa K. Roehrich has built here.
It really is a masterclass in taking a localized dark fantasy story with emotionally great characters and organically expanding it into a multiversal epic that questions the very nature of fate, systemic trauma, and cosmic balance. I want to thank you, the learner, for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into Storm of Secrets and Sorrow.
It has been an absolute pleasure unpacking this monumental lore with you. And as we wrap up our discussion today, I want to connect this epic fantasy struggle back to something we all experience in the real world.
What's the takeaway here?
Think about how often in life the labels, the expectations, or the rigid constraints placed upon us by the systems we live in, whether that's in our careers, our families, or our societal structures, completely fail to capture our true potential or our inherent complexity.
It happens every day.
It's just like DeVrom's categorization systems entirely failed to understand Tessa. They tried to put her in a box, treating her as a manageable nuisance or a simple tool, completely failing to recognize that she was a fundamental farce of nature.
That is such a profound takeaway. Never let a broken, rigid system dictate your inherent worth or define your potential. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day.
Something to keep you thinking.
We've talked a lot today about Tessa's immense power threatening the cosmic balance. We've discussed how the Augury and the Worldwalkers view chaos as this ultimate villainous force that will destroy all realms. But if Tessa's power is truly born of the wild and untamed, and if DeVrom is a realm fundamentally built on centuries of oppressive, stagnant, and unimaginably cruel rules, is chaos actually the villain?
A truly fascinating question to ponder.
Or is chaos simply the universe's natural, entirely necessary immune response to a world that has been sick for far too long? Keep seeking out new knowledge. Keep questioning the narrative you are handed. Look for multiple perspectives and always search for the hidden lore in everything you read. Until next time, stay curious.